The wind tasted of dust and iron that morning. From the southern ridges of the Dragoon Hills, a lone rider cut across the sunrise haze. His name was Elias Creed, and the folks at Dustwater Crossing only knew 3 things about him. He ran cattle alone, he spoke less than a preacher's shadow, and he hadn't been seen in church since the war. His hat was pulled low against the eastern glare, coat worn thin by years of sun and solitude. On his saddle horn hung a rusted canteen, and strapped to his back, his old Sharps rifle, wood grip worn smooth by memory. He rode like a man with nowhere to be and no one to answer to. They said he once had a family, a wife, maybe a boy. Folks speculated. Nobody asked. Because men like Elias didn't talk about the past, they buried it. Dustwater Crossing, population 214, looked like any other frontier town bleeding into the desert, except this morning it bled something darker. As Elias trotted into the edge of town, he saw a crowd, big, tight, angry. It moved like a single organism, pulsing around the town square gallows hastily built from fence wood and barn rope. A buzz of shouts, curses, and something worse, laughter. He slowed his horse, watched from the shadows of the livery stable. And there, standing above the mob, arms bound, head bowed beneath a fraying noose, was a woman, Apache. She didn't cry, didn't tremble. She just stared forward, shoulders straight, jaw set like carved stone. There was something in that stillness that struck Elias harder than any bullet ever had. Her name, he'd learn later, was Sahale Firewind. But right then, she was just the Apache woman they meant to hang. A boy, maybe 10, threw a stone. It struck her collarbone with a sickening thunk. She flinched, but didn't fall. The crowd cheered. Elias's knuckles tightened on his reins. "She killed Tom Langston," someone roared. "She led the raid. My brother's dead because of her. Savage whore, string her up." Elias dismounted. He didn't fully know why. Maybe it was the way she refused to beg. Maybe it was the hollow echo of his own grief in her silence. Or maybe it was the voice in his gut, quiet but relentless, that had always known the difference between a man's justice and a mob's vengeance. He stepped through the crowd like he didn't notice their stares, like he didn't hear the whispers. "That's Creed, rancher from Ghost Ridge. Crazy to get involved." But Elias Creed had already made the kind of decision you don't come back from. On the gallows platform, Sheriff Miles Corwin wiped sweat from his brow with a trembling hand. A man not evil, just scared and too weak to stand alone. He unrolled a paper. "By the authority of the territory," he said, voice shaking, "Sahale Firewind stands accused of murder, theft, and conspiracy against the people of Dustwater Crossing." Elias stepped forward. His voice cut through the morning like frost. "What evidence do you have?" The sheriff froze, heads turned. "Excuse me, Mr. Creed." "I said," Elias repeated, "what proof have you got that this woman did any of what you're about to kill her for?" Murmurs rippled. Even the children fell quiet. And from the back of the crowd, a gravel-thick voice snarled back. "Proof? She's Apache. That's all the damn proof we need." The voice belonged to Jed Callahan, thick arms, knife scar under his right eye. War veteran turned cattle boss and walking embodiment of frontier hate. "Now you hold on, Callahan," the sheriff stammered. We were just following the town's call for justice." "Justice?" Elias said flatly. "You call this justice?" He looked at Sahale again. She met his gaze, not pleading, but fierce. And in that look, Elias Creed saw what the crowd refused to see. Not a threat, Not a savage, a soul, just like the one he'd lost 10 years ago. And he knew he wasn't riding away today. For a long moment, no one spoke. Just the creak of the gallows in the breeze, the slow rattle of a sign swinging over the saloon, and the rise and tide of tension in a town standing on the edge of something it didn't yet understand. Then Jed Callahan stepped forward, arms crossed over his broad chest, voice hard with contempt. "You gone soft, Creed? All those years alone out on Ghost Ridge turn your stomach to milk?" He spit near Elias's boot. "That Apache witch killed Tom Langston. She's one of 'em, one of the ones that raid our farms, burn our stock, scalp our kin." "Enough," Elias said. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. It had weight, like stone rolling downhill. "She's accused. That don't make her guilty. And until someone shows me evidence, this rope means nothing but murder." The crowd shifted. Some faces flickered with uncertainty. Others hardened further. Callahan sneered. "You defending her now, Creed, or you just like how she looks in buckskin?" That did it. The tension snapped like a dry branch. Elias moved before the insult even finished leaving Jed's mouth. 3 steps, 1 fist. Callahan staggered backward, blood blooming from his lip like spilled whiskey. A gasp tore through the crowd. Then silence. The kind of silence that hums with violence waiting to erupt. From the platform, Sheriff Miles Corwin raised both hands, his voice cracking. "Gentlemen, please, no more blood. We're civilized here." Elias turned toward the sheriff, still breathing hard from the punch. "Then act like it," he said. "Civilized folk don't lynch women without trial." Corwin swallowed hard, looking from Elias to Callahan to the woman on the platform. Sweat beaded down his temples. "Look," he stammered, "the Langston boy saw Apache riders heading south the same night his pa was shot. Tracks match their ponies. What more do you need?" "What I need," Elias said, "is to hear it from her." All eyes turned to the gallows. Sahale's mouth had remained sealed this whole time, but now she spoke, voice low and sure. "I wasn't near Dustwater that night. I was in the hills. My cousin was sick with fever. I was tending her with willow bark tea and root water." She paused, then looked directly at Elias. "There were no raids, not by me, not by my people." Callahan barked a laugh. "How convenient. No one to back her up. And you believe her, Creed, after what her kind's done to this land?" Elias didn't look at him. He looked at Sahale. And for a man who didn't trust easy, who had seen lies twist mouths and destroy homes, he believed her. "Where's the Langston boy now?" Elias asked the sheriff. Corwin hesitated. "With his mother, out at their claim." "Why?" "Because he's the only witness you've got, and if you're about to hang a woman based on rumor and tracks in the dirt, you'd best be damn sure." The crowd murmured again, louder this time. Doubt, discomfort, the kind that crawls beneath your skin when you realize you've nearly done something terrible. Callahan stepped forward again, face flushed with rage. "This is a waste of time. We got dead friends in the ground and savages on the loose. String her up and be done with it." Elias turned, stared at him long and cold. "You ever seen a battlefield, Callahan?" Jed hesitated. "I fought in the war." "Then you know what it looks like when men do wrong with banners and speeches to cover it. You've seen what blind hate does." He paused. Let the words settle. "This here," he gestured to the gallows, "this is the same damn thing." Behind him, Sahale stood still, the noose heavy around her neck. But her eyes burned with something fierce and defiant. Not fear, fire. "Sheriff," Elias said, never looking away from Callahan, "if you don't cut her down, I will." The threat wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be, because the gun on Elias Creed's hip wasn't for decoration. And every man in Dustwater Crossing suddenly remembered. Elias hadn't come looking for a fight, but he sure as hell wasn't scared of one. Nobody moved. The sheriff's boots creaked against the platform wood, but he didn't climb the steps. Instead, he stood frozen, caught between the man on the gallows and the one now threatening to dismantle it. Elias Creed hadn't shouted. He didn't need to. Every man in Dustwater Crossing knew that when he said he'd do something, it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. A flicker passed across Sheriff Miles Corwin's face, something between guilt and fear. He looked at the noose, then at Sahale, then at Elias, then at the crowd, whose fury had grown confused. That's when Jed Callahan stepped forward. "You gonna let this lone wolf cowhand tell you how to run this town?" he barked. "The woman's Apache, that's all you need to know. Her people have been raiding us for years. You think she's different? Hell no, she just hides it better." He turned to the crowd, voice rising like a sermon gone wrong. "You all remember what happened to my brother. They found his body 10 miles out, stripped and scalped. Don't tell me you forgot." Murmurs rippled through the mob. Some nodded, others looked down. Elias didn't flinch. His stance was loose, but the weight in his gaze landed like a blow. "What happened to your brother was murder," Elias said. "I don't doubt that, and I'm sorry. But killing the wrong person doesn't make it right. It just makes another grave." Callahan stepped closer, jabbing a thick finger toward Sahale. "You think this is some kind of moral lesson, Creed? Some personal crusade for justice?" He spat in the dust. "You're not the only one who's lost someone." "I'm not here for a lecture," Elias replied. "I'm here for proof." The crowd rustled again. You could feel the ground shifting. Not in Elias's favor, not yet, but something had cracked. The momentum was slowing, like a train running out of steam. And Sahale Firewind still stood silently. Her wrists were raw from the rope, but her posture hadn't changed. Her expression was unreadable, but in her eyes a fire was growing. "She's one of them," someone shouted from the back. "They've been stealing cattle and burning homesteads all spring." "Yeah, and what about Tom Langston?" another voice added. "His boy's out there right now without a father." That name hit the air like a bullet. Elias turned to the sheriff. "That boy," he said quietly. "Where is he?" Corwin swallowed hard. "Out at the claim with his mother. They haven't come into town since the funeral." "Then why aren't we asking him what he saw?" Elias demanded. Callahan scoffed. "Because he's a kid. What's he gonna say that changes what we already know?" Elias's voice dropped a note deeper. "What you think you know, Callahan, that's the problem." Now the crowd was listening, really listening. A young woman holding her baby stepped forward slightly, eyes uncertain. A storekeeper shifted his weight, as if wanting to speak but unsure if it was safe. The tension was still thick, but no longer one-sided. Sheriff Corwin cleared his throat. "Mr. Creed, I didn't ask for this. The people wanted justice." "Then give them justice," Elias replied, "not a lynching." For a moment, silence. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, "Let her speak!" All heads turned. It was an older man, Doc Silas Merrick, white-bearded and wiry, stepping forward with his black medical bag slung across his shoulder. He looked around with steady eyes. "We're about to take a life," he said, voice firm. "If we're civilized, we'd better be damned sure we're not making a mistake. And I, for one, would like to hear what the accused has to say." Callahan glared at him. "She'll lie, like all of 'em." "Then let's hear her lie," Doc replied, "and decide for ourselves." More murmurs, more hesitation, and finally, Sheriff Corwin nodded. "All right," he said softly. "Miss Firewind, you may speak. But I warn you, if you lie to this town, it won't save you." Sahale slowly raised her head. Her voice, when it came, was low, clear, and carried the weight of someone who had been waiting a long time to be heard. "I didn't kill Tom Langston," she said, "and I wasn't even near Dustwater when it happened." Another hush fell. Sahale took a breath. The fire in her eyes did not flicker. "I was in the hills tending to my cousin. She was dying of fever. And I'll tell you what herbs I used, what day it started, where we were camped, if you listen." And just like that, the mob started to fracture. The square had never been this quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the land itself leaned in to hear the voice of a woman who had, until now, been nothing but a target. Sahale Firewind stood tall, though the ropes still hung around her neck like a serpent waiting to strike. Her hands were red from the ropes, her face dusty from thrown stones. But her voice, when she spoke again, was calm. "I was 50 miles from Dustwater Crossing the night Tom Langston died, up in the high bluffs near Stonecry Creek." She paused. No one interrupted. "My cousin, Pale Leaf, had taken ill. Fever. She burned hot for 3 days, couldn't hold down water. Her skin turned the color of dry leaves. She couldn't speak by the second night." The crowd stirred faintly. Someone muttered, "Sounds like yellow fever." Sahale nodded slightly. "I gave her cool compresses from the river, made a tea from willow bark to fight the fever. When I could find it, I ground up echinacea root, mixed it with honey to help her swallow. I stayed by her side until her fever broke." Her voice didn't waver. She wasn't begging. She wasn't defending. She was stating facts. Doc Silas Merrick stepped closer to the platform, eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "What kind of compresses?" he asked. Sahale answered without hesitation. "Clean cloth soaked in stream water, changed often. I wrapped her hands and feet. Kept her cool, but not cold." Merrick nodded slowly. "And the willow bark, white willow or desert?" "Desert," Sahale said, "bitter but stronger." A few townsfolk glanced at the doctor, as if searching his face for something, confirmation maybe. Merrick folded his arms and addressed them directly. "She's not guessing," he said. "That's how you treat yellow fever. Most folks around here wouldn't know all that unless they'd studied with a doctor, or lived close to the land for a long time." "But how do we know she was there?" someone shouted. "Could be a story, could be made up." Elias Creed turned toward the voice. "It's a hell of a story to make up under a noose." Callahan scoffed loudly. "So what if she knows a few folk cures? That don't clear her of murder." "Then what would?" Elias fired back. "A full confession from the devil himself?" Callahan's jaw tensed. The crowd was no longer entirely his. He could feel it. Sahale looked out at the faces. Men with rifles, women holding their children close. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't demand forgiveness. All she asked for was to be seen. "I never met Tom Langston," she said. "I've never crossed your fences, stolen your cattle, or touched a white man's home. I came here 2 weeks ago, looking for work, just enough coin to buy medicine for my cousin." A mother in the crowd pressed her hand to her chest. A rancher wiped sweat from his brow, eyes cast downward. Doc Merrick cleared his throat. "I've seen yellow fever," he said, "treated it. And I've seen folks lie about it, too, get the symptoms all wrong. She didn't." He turned to the sheriff. "If what she says is true, then someone else killed Tom Langston.
And if we hang her today, we'll never find the men who really did." The words landed heavy. Sheriff Miles Corwin looked like a man sinking in quicksand. He rubbed his temples, then looked at Elias. "I didn't ask for this," he whispered. "You didn't stop it either," Elias replied.
At that, Callahan stepped forward again, voice thick with mockery. "Sweet tale, but she's still Apache. Her kind don't write things down. No witnesses, no proof, just stories, like ghosts in the hills." "That's where you're wrong," came a small, cracking voice. All heads turned. A boy was pushing his way through the crowd, face flushed, clutching something in both hands. "I got proof," he said, chest heaving. It was Tommy Langston. The boy stumbled into the open like a ghost dragged from a nightmare. Dust clung to his boots and shirt, his cheeks streaked with sweat and tears. In his trembling hands, he clutched a crumpled scrap of blue cloth, its edge torn, stained dark with old blood. Tommy Langston, no older than 12, son of the man everyone believed had been killed by an Apache. The crowd parted for him as if some invisible force had pushed them back. Even Jed Callahan froze, his scowl faltering. "Tommy," Sheriff Corwin called, voice cracking. "Son, what are you doing here?" "I heard yelling," the boy said, trying to catch his breath, "and talk about hanging her. So I ran. I couldn't stay quiet anymore." He pointed up at Sahale. "She didn't kill my pa." The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. "What did you just say?" Callahan barked. "I said she didn't do it," Tommy shouted. His voice cracked, but he didn't back down. "She saved me." Elias took a slow step forward. "Easy, son. Just take your time. Tell us what happened." Tommy looked at Sahale, then at the sheriff, and then at the sea of grown-up faces staring at him, some full of rage, others donning confusion. "I was with Pa," he began. "We were checking fence posts up near the north pasture when we heard gunshots. Pa told me to hide, said he'd go look." The boy's hands clenched tighter around the cloth. "I watched from behind a rock. I saw them. 3 men. They weren't Indians. They were white, dressed like cowhands, but they wore bandanas over their faces. One had a scar like a crescent moon on his hand. Another limped like his leg had never healed right." The crowd listened, stunned. Even the wind returned, rustling shirts and skirts like whispers of guilt. They had Pa's horse, already loaded with feed and tools. When he tried to stop them, they shot him, right there. One of them saw me, tried to grab me. I ran. His lip trembled. "I ran so fast I couldn't breathe. I tripped on a root and cut my arm. That's when she found me." He looked directly at Sahale. "She helped me stop the bleeding, gave me water, sat with me until I stopped crying. She didn't know who I was, but she stayed." A woman near the front gasped. Another man lowered his rifle. Tommy held up the scrap of blue cloth. "One of them was wearing this. It tore when Pa fought back. I grabbed it before I ran." Callahan stepped forward, face pale. You're just a kid. You don't know what you saw. Maybe you were scared. Maybe they were Apaches, just dressed different." "They weren't," Tommy snapped, louder than anyone expected. "They weren't Apache. No feathers, no war paint, no ponies, just white men who stole my pa's gear and blamed it on someone else." Dr. Merrick stepped forward and examined the cloth, then nodded grimly. "Machine-stitched, cotton weave. This didn't come from any Apache camp." The crowd murmured again, this time louder. Doubt spread like fire licking at dry brush. All those certainties they'd carried, all that rage, it no longer had a place to go. Jed Callahan's voice rose above the noise. "Even if she didn't pull the trigger, her kind's still behind the raids. They've been hitting farms for months."
But the crowd wasn't so sure anymore. A grizzled rancher near the pack scratched his beard. Maybe not. Maybe we been fed lies. Elias looked at Sahale. Her eyes met his. Not grateful, not surprised, just steady, like she'd always known the truth would surface. He turned back to Tommy. "You're brave, son.
Real brave." Tommy looked up. "My pa always said a man's judged by what he stands for, not what he's afraid of." And in that moment, the town of Dustwater Crossing, the whole damn square, felt like it might shift on its axis. Not all the way, not yet, but something was breaking. And once broken, some lies don't fit back together again. The boy stumbled into the open like a ghost dragged from a nightmare. Dust clung to his boots and shirt, his cheeks streaked with sweat and tears. In his trembling hands, he clutched a crumpled scrap of blue cloth, its edge torn, stained dark with old blood. Tommy Langston, no older than 12, son of the man everyone believed had been killed by an Apache. The crowd parted for him as if some invisible force had pushed them back. Even Jed Callahan froze, his scowl faltering. "Tommy," Sheriff Corwin called, voice cracking. "Son, what are you doing here?" "I heard yelling," the boy said, trying to catch his breath, "and talk about hanging her. So I ran. I couldn't stay quiet anymore." He pointed up at Sahale. "She didn't kill my pa." The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. "What did you just say?" Callahan barked. "I said she didn't do it," Tommy shouted. His voice cracked, but he didn't back down. "She saved me." Elias took a slow step forward. "Easy, son. Just take your time. Tell us what happened." Tommy looked at Sahale, then at the sheriff, and then at the sea of grown-up faces staring at him, some full of rage, others dawning confusion. "I was with Pa," he began. "We were checking fence posts up near the north pasture when we heard gunshots. Pa told me to hide, said he'd go look." The boy's hands clenched tighter around the cloth. "I watched from behind a rock. I saw 'em, 3 men. They weren't Indians, they were white, dressed like cowhands, but they wore bandanas over their faces. One had a scar like a crescent moon on his hand. Another limped, like his leg had never healed right." The crowd listened, stunned. Even the wind returned, rustling shirts and skirts like whispers of guilt. They had Pa's horse, already loaded with feed and tools. When he tried to stop them, they shot him, right there. One of them saw me, tried to grab me. I ran. His lip trembled. "I ran so fast I couldn't breathe. I tripped on a root and cut my arm. That's when she found me." He looked directly at Sahale. "She helped me stop the bleeding, gave me water, sat with me until I stopped crying. She didn't know who I was, but she stayed." A woman near the front gasped. Another man lowered his rifle. Tommy held up the scrap of blue cloth. "One of them was wearing this. It tore when Pa fought back. I grabbed it before I ran." Callahan stepped forward, face pale. You're just a kid. You don't know what you saw. Maybe you were scared. Maybe they were Apaches, just dressed different." "They weren't," Tommy snapped, louder than anyone expected. "They weren't Apache. No feathers, no war paint, no ponies. Just white men who stole my pa's gear and blamed it on someone else." Dr. Merrick stepped forward and examined the cloth, then nodded grimly. Machine-stitched, cotton weave, this didn't come from any Apache camp. The crowd murmured again, this time louder. Doubt spread like fire licking at dry brush. All those certainties they'd carried, all that rage, it no longer had a place to go. Jed Callahan's voice rose above the noise. "Even if she didn't pull the trigger, her kind's still behind the raids. They've been hitting farms for months." But the crowd wasn't so sure anymore. A grizzled rancher near the back scratched his beard. "Maybe not.
Maybe we've been fed lies. Elias looked at Sahale. Her eyes met his. Not grateful, not surprised, just steady, like she'd always known the truth would surface. He turned back to Tommy. "You're brave, son, real brave." Tommy looked up. "My pa always said, a man's judged by what he stands for."
Not what he's afraid of. And in that moment, the town of Dustwater Crossing, the whole damn square, felt like it might shift on its axis. Not all the way, not yet, but something was breaking. And once broken, some lies don't fit back together again. It should have ended there. The truth had been laid bare, the lies unmasked. But mobs don't dissolve just because the truth walks into the room. Hate doesn't vanish. It claws, it fights, and it digs in. And Jed Callahan still wasn't finished. "She's still Apache," he bellowed, voice cracking like a whip across the square. "You're all standing here talking like words change what her kind's done. You think this makes it right?" He turned in a slow circle, pointing at faces he knew, names he'd fought beside in the war or worked with in the dust-choked fields. "They killed our kin, burned our barns. You gonna forget all that 'cause a boy brought in a scrap of cloth and a drifter waved a watch around?" No one answered. "You saw what they did to my brother. You saw what they did to the Petersons out west. The Reynolds girl, burned in her own house. And now you want to let this woman just walk out of here." His voice rose higher, but his authority had shrunk, because the crowd didn't roar back, not this time. A young rancher near the front shifted uncomfortably. A woman whispered something into her husband's ear. The sheriff still held the paper list in his trembling hand. No one stepped forward to echo Callahan's fire, not now. And that silence, it was louder than any cheer. "I stood by y'all when no one else would," Callahan shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "When this town was afraid, I fought for you." Elias took one step closer to him. "You fought for your hate," he said, "and it's killing you from the inside out." Callahan's eyes snapped to Elias, wild and unfocused. "She's still got blood on her hands, Creed!" "Even if she didn't kill Tom Langston, her people have done plenty." "And yours haven't," Elias said flatly. "We burned villages. We took land. We hung boys too young to shave because they wore feathers in their hair. If she's guilty by blood, then we all are." The crowd reacted, murmurs, shifting feet, lowered eyes. Callahan's hand twitched at his belt. Elias saw it. "Don't," he warned. But Callahan wasn't listening anymore. He was drowning. In shame, in rage, in the awful silence of being wrong. "I should have killed her myself," he muttered. "Should have done it before you showed up." He took a step toward the scaffold. Sheriff Corwin moved, hand on his holster, but not fast enough. The man who moved first was a woman. She stepped forward from the front row. Middle-aged, dressed in black, grief written deep into her eyes. "Jed," she said. Her voice was soft, but it stopped him. "You think I don't mourn?" she continued. "My son's buried behind the chapel. My husband lost a leg in the last raid. I've prayed every night for justice." Callahan blinked, momentarily confused. "But this," she said, pointing to the noose still looped around Sahale's neck, "this isn't justice. This is revenge. And revenge won't bring our dead back." She stepped toward the scaffold, climbed 2 steps, and, hands shaking, untied the knot. The rope slipped free from Sahale's neck. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't weep. They just watched as something heavy and invisible fell between them, a weight they'd carried too long. Sahale let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. Elias stayed silent,
watching Callahan like a mountain waiting for lightning. Callahan backed away. He looked smaller now, less like a threat and more like a man whose words had finally betrayed him. Sheriff Corwin cleared his throat. "Miss Firewind," he said, voice tight, "you're free to go. You should have been from the start." She didn't move. Not yet. Instead, she looked at the crowd, one by one.
And what they saw in her face wasn't victory, it was mercy. Then, finally, she stepped down. Beside her, Elias turned to Corwin. "This ain't finished." Corwin nodded. "I know. You gonna go after him?" "Someone has to," Elias said. Tommy Langston stepped forward, still holding the torn cloth. "I want to go too." Sahale looked at the boy, really looked at him, and nodded. The past wasn't healed, but for the first time, it wasn't in control either. And in the heart of Dustwater Crossing, the thunder finally broke. They left Dustwater Crossing just after sunrise, riding 3 abreast beneath a sky the color of scorched bone. The gallows still stood behind them, empty now, silent, but no one looked back. Sheriff Miles Corwin had come to them just before first light, hat in hand, voice low. He looked at Sahale the way a man looks at a grave he almost dug himself. "I won't ask your forgiveness," he said, "but I will ask for your help." He handed Elias a folded paper with his seal and name, deputization orders, legal authority signed and witnessed by Doc Merrick and 2 councilmen. "Find the ones who did this," Corwin said. "Bring back what truth we can." Elias took the paper without a word. Sahale said nothing either. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was a verdict. And Tommy Langston, barely 12, was already packed and mounted by the time they reached his house. "You sure about this?" Elias asked, watching the boy swing into the saddle, his father's rifle strapped across his back like it belonged there. Tommy nodded once. "They killed my pa. I got a right to see how this ends." Elias looked at Sahale, then back at the boy. He didn't argue. They rode hard until the heat began to settle on their shoulders. Dust rose behind them in lazy waves, and the desert swallowed their tracks like it wanted to forget. At noon, they stopped under a ridge to water the horses and check the map Bo Riggins had scratched out in the dirt behind the saloon. Elias crouched beside a trail of prints, deep, recent, unshod. "Fresh," he muttered. "Maybe a day ahead, maybe less." Sahale knelt beside him, her eyes scanning the nearby brush. She reached out, brushed 2 snapped twigs, then pointed toward a slope to the east. "Here, they passed through last night. Someone stumbled. See how that boot print drags?" Elias studied it. "The one with the limp," he said. She nodded. It was the first time they'd spoken since leaving town. There was no tension, just the quiet focus of people who had crossed the line between witness and participant. "I thought you might stay behind," Elias said, voice low. "I did too," Sahale replied, "until I realized the fight wasn't over." Tommy was off to the side, scanning the rocks with sharp young eyes. He knelt near a patch of flattened grass and held something up. "A coffee tin," he said, "still warm inside." Elias took it, sniffed. "Strong brew, just made. They're closer than we thought." They remounted, and as they rode, Elias felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not even purpose, but a kind of weight. The kind you feel when you know you've passed the point of return. Back in town, people would begin to whisper that Elias Creed had taken up arms alongside an Apache woman, that he'd brought a child into a man's war. He didn't care. The land was opening up ahead now, folding into dry gullies and narrow cuts, the kind of country where ambushes were born. They passed a stand of scrub oak, and Sahale raised a hand, signaling stop. She dismounted silently, eyes locked on a smudge of smoke curling just beyond the next rise. "They've made camp," she whispered, "less than a mile from here, Eagle Hollow." Elias nodded. He glanced at the sky. The sun had begun its long descent westward, shadows stretching like fingers.
Then we don't wait. Tommy chambered a round into his father's rifle, jaw set.
Sahale drew a long knife from beneath her saddlebag, curved, bone-handled, etched with symbols only she could read. Elias checked the load on his sharps. 3 riders, 3 weapons, 3 different reasons to see justice done, and only one way it would end. They crept up the canyon rim just before dusk. Eagle Hollow yawned wide below them, a rough bowl of red rock and shale with one way in and no easy way out. A small fire crackled near the center, smoke curling upward like a snake tasting the air. 3 men lounged near the flames. Their rifles rested nearby, and beside them sat a pile of stolen goods, blankets, saddles, tins of preserved meat, and a burlap sack that spilled silverware into the dirt. "Got 'em," Elias muttered. Tommy raised the spyglass Bo Riggins had lent him. "That's the one with the crescent scar," he said, "and that one limps. It's them." Sahale crouched low behind a ridge of stone, her braid tucked into her collar. Her eyes didn't blink. "They don't know they're being followed," she said. "They're laughing, eating, like they already got away with it." Elias lowered his rifle and scanned the terrain. Only 2 ways down, a steep switchback to the east and a narrow goat trail near the west ridge. "If we come at them from both sides," he said, "we can catch them in a pincer. No cover, no escape." Tommy nodded quickly. "I'll take the goat trail." "Negative," Elias replied. "You stay with me." Sahale didn't move, didn't blink. "I'll go down alone." Elias turned sharply toward her. "No, you won't." "They think I'm dead," she said. "They strung me up in Dustwater. If I walk in slow, no rifle, no threat, they'll let me get close. It's suicide. They see a white man's rifle, they shoot. They see a boy, they panic. But a lone Apache woman?" She shrugged. "Just a curiosity. Or a toy." Elias's jaw tightened. "I'm not sending you into that." "You're not sending me," she said, eyes locked on his. "I'm walking." He didn't answer right away. There was too much in that silence. Pain, fear, the memory of what almost happened in the town square. "You survived the gallows," he said finally. "That doesn't mean you have to volunteer for the next noose." Sahale smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't survive to run." Tommy watched the exchange without a word, then said softly, "If she goes in, I go with you. We cover both sides." Elias hesitated, then slowly he nodded. Sahale pulled a leather pouch from her saddle and tucked it under her tunic. Inside were healing herbs, a flint striker, and the knife curved like a crescent moon. Her medicine and her blade, 2 kinds of power from the world she came from. "I'll ride in slow," she said. "Ask for water, maybe trade. When I raise my hand and touch my braid, twice, you move." Elias took one last look over the ridge. "Don't take chances." Sahale gave a dry laugh. "This whole life is a chance." She slipped down the slope, disappearing into the dust and the coming dark. Elias turned to Tommy. "You stay low. Don't fire unless I do." "I know," the boy said. His face was pale, but his grip on the rifle never wavered. They moved into position, one on each side of the canyon. Below them, the 3 outlaws laughed and passed around a tin of beans. And across the rocks, between shadows and starlight, a woman once marked for death rode straight toward them. Sahale rode into the hollow like a ghost rising from ash. Her shoulders were square, her pace steady. Not too slow to seem scared, not too fast to seem suspicious. Just enough to make men lazy. The 3 outlaws looked up, blinking into the dusk. One stood, a wiry man with a missing ear and a Henry rifle slung across his back. "Well, I'll be," he said. "We got company." The second, heavier and limping, let out a low whistle. "That's an Apache gal."
The third, with a long crescent scar slashed down his cheek, narrowed his eyes.
"Ain't she supposed to be swinging by now?" Sahale stopped a dozen yards away, raised both hands, palms open. "I don't want trouble," she said clearly. "I'm looking for water. My horse went lame. Just passing through." The men laughed. "Yeah, we've heard that one before," said the limper. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "No name," she said. Scarface tilted his head. "You sure look like someone I saw once, up near Dustwater, on a scaffold." Sahale stayed silent. She let the firelight hit her face just right, enough to stir doubt, enough to keep them guessing. "You looking to trade?" the rifleman asked, stepping forward. "We got beans, jerky, or maybe you're offering something else." His tone turned sour, slick with something that made Sahale's knuckles tighten. "I'm offering mercy," she said. They laughed again, and as they did, she moved. Her right hand snapped down and out, the crescent knife flashing in the firelight like lightning across stone. It sliced a red arc into Scarface's forearm just as he reached for her. He screamed, staggered back, hands slick with blood. The rifleman swung his Henry toward her, but before the barrel could lift, crack! A shot rang out from above. His shoulder exploded backward, and he fell, weapon spinning into the dirt. Elias had fired. The third outlaw, the limper, lunged for cover, but too late. Sahale was on him. She drove her shoulder into his ribs, knocked the breath from his lungs, and sent him crashing into a boulder. From the canyon wall, Tommy Langston scrambled down, eyes locked on the wounded rifleman who tried to crawl away. "Stop!" the boy shouted, rifle aimed, knees shaken. The man paused, eyes wide. "I'll gut you, kid," he hissed. Tommy's voice didn't crack. "No, you won't." He stepped closer, finger tight on the trigger. The rifleman glared, bleeding badly, teeth bared, but he didn't move. Down in the hollow, Sahale turned to face Scarface again. He was holding his arm, teeth gritted. "You," he spat. "You're supposed to be dead." "I was," she said. "You just didn't finish the job." She kicked his rifle away, standing over him now. Up above, Elias called out, voice steady. "All three down, secure 'em, we're not killing today." Tommy exhaled. Sahale crouched beside Scarface, took a strip of leather and tied his wrists tight. "Where's the rest of it?" she asked. "The loot, the map, the names." He smirked. "You gonna torture me?" She leaned close. "No, I'm going to bring you back alive and let the law see what a coward looks like." The rifleman groaned. "We had a plan, a list. Dustwater was just the start." Elias reached them then, tying off the last outlaw's wrists, checking for other weapons. "We'll take their horses," he said, "and bring back every piece of what they stole." Tommy stood nearby, chest rising and falling fast, but he held his rifle steady. He looked at Sahale, and for the first time, not with awe, but with understanding. They weren't so different now. The canyon was still now, save for the groans of the wounded. 3 men, bound and bloodied, lay under the dimming sky. But one of them still crawled. Silas Greeley, the rifleman, had faked his collapse. He'd waited for the others to look away. And now, with his left arm dragging behind him like a busted wheel, he slithered toward a fallen colt nestled in the dirt. He didn't see the boy step in front of him, but he heard the hammer cock. "Don't," Tommy Langston said, voice flat. Greeley froze, inches from the revolver. He looked up at the boy, sunburned cheeks, torn sleeves, hands trembling slightly around a rifle nearly as tall as he was. "You ain't gonna shoot me, kid," Greeley said, smirking. "I can see it in your eyes." Tommy didn't blink. "You killed my pa." Greeley sniffed. "Lot of men got killed. Wasn't personal." Tommy's jaw tightened. "It is now."
For a moment, silence hovered between them, thick and hot. Then Greeley chuckled, a low, mocking sound. "Go on, then. Be a man."
"Pull the trigger. You think justice smells like gunpowder? It smells like regret, boy. You fire that shot and you'll be smelling it the rest of your life." Tommy's finger tensed, and from behind him, Elias Creed's voice came, low but clear. "You don't owe him a bullet, son." Tommy didn't turn. "He's not worth your name," Elias continued, "not your soul. Let the world see what kind of man he is, alive." Greeley coughed, tried to sit up. "They'll hang me anyway. Then the rope can do what a bullet won't," Elias said. Tommy's hands shook, but slowly, deliberately, he lowered the rifle and stepped back. Sahale moved in, scooping up the revolver and tossing it far into the rocks. She met Tommy's eyes. "You chose the hard road," she said. "That's how warriors are made." Tommy nodded once, not like a boy, like a man. They tied Greeley's hands and hoisted him onto a horse. The other two were already bound to their saddles, moaning. In the bandits' camp, Elias found a leather satchel, stuffed with coins, jewelry, and a folded sheet of parchment. He unrolled it. A map of planned raids, names of ranches, Dustwater Crossing circled in red, and beside it, a list of names. Some of them were local, some Elias recognized, some he didn't. "They were working with someone inside," he muttered. "Someone in town." Sahale looked at the names and her jaw clenched. More truth to come. Elias folded the list, tucked it into his vest. Then he looked at Tommy, who now stood beside the fire, staring into its glow. "You did good today," Elias said. "Your father would have been proud." Tommy didn't answer right away. Then he said, "He always said, justice don't come from hate. Comes from holding the line when no one else will." Elias smiled. "Then you held it." The three of them, the rancher, the warrior, and the boy, mounted their horses beneath the stars. They didn't ride fast. They didn't need to. Behind them, justice smoldered in the ashes. Ahead, the road to Dustwater Crossing waited, ready to receive 3 witnesses, 3 names, and 1 final reckoning. They rode into Dustwater Crossing at high noon. 3 riders, 3 prisoners, and the dust of justice rising behind them like a storm long overdue. Folks stepped out of storefronts and saloons, hats in hand, brows furrowed. Some gasped, some whispered, others simply stared at the woman who had once stood on their gallows, now returning upright in her saddle, chin high, fire in her eyes. Sahale Firewind didn't flinch. She let them look. Behind her, tied to their own saddles, were Silas Greeley, Walt Kane, and Hank Dobbins, the real murderers. Faces bruised, arms bound, boots dragging the ground. Their guilt clung to them thicker than the dust. Elias Creed dismounted first. He said nothing, just untied the map and the list of targets from his saddlebag and handed them silently to Sheriff Miles Corwin. The sheriff took the papers with shaking hands. He scanned them, read the names, saw Dustwater circled in red. His face went pale. "God help us," he whispered. "They were going to burn the town." "Not just Dustwater," Elias said. "Half the valley. They planned to pin every raid on the Apache." Bo Riggins stepped forward, hat pressed to his chest. "We were fools," he muttered. "Blind and stupid fools." Corwin turned to Sahale, eyes lowered. "I can't undo what we did," he said, "but I swear to you now, Dustwater will remember this day." Sahale didn't answer with words. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the rope, the same noose they'd put around her neck. She dropped it at the sheriff's feet. "No more of this," she said. "Not for my people.
not for yours." The silence that followed wasn't shame. It was the beginning of understanding. By sunset, the prisoners were locked in the jailhouse. Charges were filed. Witnesses were named. Bo Riggins gave a full account. So did Doc Merrick.
And Sheriff Corwin, publicly, solemnly, apologized before the whole town. "We almost hanged an innocent woman," he said, "and we let our fears write the verdict." Dustwater Crossing, for the first time in its short, dusty life, hung its head, not in pride or defiance, but in recognition of its own cowardice. Justice, at last, had come home. That night, the house on the edge of town, Elias Creed's ranch house, held more warmth than it had in years. The hearth glowed steady, bread baked in the oven, and at the wooden table once built for a family long gone, 3 people sat in silence that needed no words. Sahale Firewind tended a pot of stew, her knife no longer drawn for battle, but for chopping carrots. She moved with quiet purpose, sleeves rolled, hair loose, shoulders finally at ease. Across the table, Tommy Langston polished his father's rifle with a cloth too big for his small hands. But his eyes, no longer filled with boyish fire, held the calm of someone who'd faced the edge and didn't fall. Elias sat at the head, boots dusted off, hands calloused but clean. They had been through something together, something that didn't just stitch wounds, but rewrote the space between them. Not as strangers, not as rescuer and rescued, but as something else. Chosen family. When dinner was done, they stepped outside into the open dark. Stars wheeled silently above. The desert air was cool and wide, stretching beyond the fence line like a promise. Sahale broke the quiet first. "This land, it's old. It remembers everything." Elias nodded. "It remembers pain. But maybe now it'll remember something else." Tommy looked up at both of them. "You think we'll stay together? Keep doing this?" Sahale smiled, her eyes reflecting starlight. "We're not done. Not if others are still hanging from ropes made by fear." Elias placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Then we ride again, not as vigilantes, but as a voice for the ones who don't have one." There was no oath spoken, no contract signed. Only firelight on weathered faces and a silence that said, "We found each other, and that's enough." There was no plaque, no parade, no preacher with a booming voice. But on the edge of Dustwater Crossing, beside an old cottonwood tree, Tommy Langston hammered a small sign into the soil. Burned into the wood were just 4 words: "Truth rides with us." He stepped back and looked at it for a long time. Sahale stood beside him, arms folded, her expression soft but firm. Behind them, Elias watched from the porch, hat low, pipe unlit. They weren't chasing fame, they were planting a message. One that said, you don't have to be the sheriff to bring justice. You don't have to be blood to be family. You just have to stand when it's easier to look away. In today's world, we're not faced with lynch mobs and desert ambushes, but we still see injustice, sometimes quieter, sometimes dressed in law, but no less cruel. And in those moments when the world waits for someone to speak up, someone to say, this isn't right, we each have a choice, to ride on or to ride for something, like Elias Creed did, like Sahale Firewind did, like a boy with no training but a lion's heart once did. So if this story stirred something in you, if it made you remember the strength of standing tall, even alone, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to this channel for more true Wild West stories, tales of courage, of truth, of people who weren't born heroes but became one when it mattered most. And tell us in the comments, what does justice mean to you when no one else is watching? Because out here in the dust, under this sky, stories still matter,
and yours might be the next one we tell.